It was a Monday morning, the kind of morning where phones buzz non-stop, coffee spills too fast, and airport lines stretch like rivers of frustration. And at Gate 34 of JFK International Airport stood Brandon Keller, millionaire, tech entrepreneur, a man who had sold his first app at 23 and now owned a company worth $150 million. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than most passengers' rent and typed on his phone like it owed him money. He was flying to San Francisco for an investor summit. First class. Seat 1A. Because of course. Boarding had just started. Passengers in Group 1 were lining up, and Brandon, like always, was right on time, sipping a sleek travel espresso, texting his assistant, and ignoring the world. Until he heard it. A soft voice behind him. "Oh dear, I must have booked the wrong—" He turned slightly. There, shuffling behind him, was an elderly woman. Petite, white-haired, worn green coat, a purse big enough to hold the whole world, and probably a few cats. She was clutching her ticket and squinting at the sign that said first-class boarding. People behind her were already annoyed. "Lady, this isn't the gate for Orlando. Ma'am, the other line is economy." Brandon stepped aside. "Ma'am," he said gently. "Oh, I think I'm in the wrong place. I'm sorry, I've never flown alone before." He smiled. "Let me see your ticket." She handed it over with trembling fingers. 26B middle seat, economy. He glanced at his 1A, then back at her. She looked exhausted, but kind. Her eyes weren't just tired. They carried a weight. Brandon could have just boarded. Instead, he said, "How about we switch seats?" The old woman blinked. "You want to give up first class? Looks like you need it more than I do." The gate agent looked surprised. "Sir, you sure?" "Completely." And before anyone could stop him, Brandon handed her his boarding pass. 30 minutes later, Brandon was squished between two strangers in 26B, knees to his chest, wondering if he had just made a dumb choice. But he had no idea that this one act of kindness was about to flip his entire life upside down. The flight took off smoothly. Clouds rolled past the windows. Drinks were served. Seatbelt signs flickered off. Brandon sat wedged into seat 26B, arms pinned between a dozing accountant and a toddler eating crackers out of a baseball cap. This was a far cry from the usual first-class comfort he was used to. No hot towels, no personal screen, no leg room. But oddly, he didn't feel regret. Just curious. About an hour into the flight, a flight attendant made her way down the aisle and stopped at his row. "Mr. Keller?" Brandon blinked. "Yes?" "The woman in seat 1A. She asked if you'd come speak with her for a moment." Brandon glanced around. "Really?" "She said it's important." Heads turned as Brandon stood and walked toward the front of the plane. There she was, seat 1A, porcelain teacup in hand, blanket across her knees, Tom buying like she'd been expecting him all along. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the empty spot next to her. He sat awkwardly on the armrest. "I didn't get your name earlier," she said. Brandon Keller." Her eyes sparkled. "You're the software man." He paused. "You know me? Let's say I read things, keep track of people who matter." Brandon chuckled. "Well, I just make apps. And you gave up a seat without asking for anything. That's rare." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet-wrapped box. "I want you to have this." "Ma'am, I didn't." "Not now. Open it later. Promise?" Brandon nodded. "Thank you. But why?" She leaned close, just enough for him to hear above the hum of the plane. "Because the world doesn't need more power. It needs more people like you in power." She smiled. "That's all I'll say. For now." When the plane landed, she was whisked off in a wheelchair by a private escort before he could even say goodbye. At baggage claim, she was gone, like a ghost. That night, in his hotel room, Brandon unwrapped the box. Inside, a gold pocket watch. Engraved inside the lid were words, "To whoever carries this, kindness is currency." Signed, Margaret Evelyn Astor. His eyes widened. He knew that name. Margaret Astor, billionaire, real estate empire, global philanthropist. Vanished from public life a decade ago, rumors said she lived on a private island, that she had dementia, that she was unreachable, but she had been on his flight, in his seat, and now he held her legacy in his hands. Brandon barely slept. The watch sat on the hotel nightstand, gleaming faintly under the lamp. He couldn't stop staring at it. Who gives away something so rare, so personal, to a stranger? The inscription echoed in his head. Kindness is currency. The next morning, he opened the door to his suite and froze. A man in a charcoal suit stood in the hallway, holding a crisp white envelope. "Mr. Keller?" "Yes." "This is for you, from Ms. Astor." The man handed over the envelope, nodded once, and walked away. No explanation. No small talk. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in the kind of elegant script you don't see anymore. "Dear Mr. Keller, you don't know me, but I know of you. I've read about your rise, your innovations, your quiet philanthropy. And I watched how, without hesitation, you gave something valuable to a stranger who seemed to need it more. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't ask. You just... That told me more about you than any resume ever could. So I'm giving you a choice." The letter continued. "Attached is a formal transfer agreement. It gives you control of the Astor Educational Trust, an entity with $25 million in assets built to uplift the forgotten. I've managed it quietly for 40 years, but the world is changing. It needs a new voice, a new heart. You'll be tested, criticized. Some will say you didn't earn this, but I believe you did. Use it well. Change what needs changing. Do good. Loudly. Yours in faith, Margaret Evelyn Astor." Brandon stared at the page for a long time. This wasn't a reward. It was a challenge. A passing of the torch. Over the next 3 weeks, his life flipped upside down. He met Astor's legal team, sat in front of foundation boards, was grilled by advisors who had managed the fund for decades. And eventually, he was handed the keys. By the end of that month, headlines began to swirl. Millionaire, given $25 trust after giving up first-class seat. Who is Brandon Keller, the stranger chosen by a billionaire? Modern-day miracle or PR stunt? But Brandon didn't care. He wasn't in it for attention. He was in it because something had shifted inside him. And now, he had a platform. Within 6 months, everything changed. Brandon restructured the trust. He launched scholarships for first-generation college students, built libraries in underfunded towns, started coding camps in cities no one paid attention to. And when asked why, he always gave the same answer: because someone gave me a seat. Now I'm giving others a table. Almost a year had passed since the flight. Brandon Keller's life looked very different. Yes, he still ran a tech company, still wore tailored suits, still had a corner office. But people didn't talk about that anymore. Now, he was known as the quiet giver. Every month, a new headline appeared. Keller funds 1,000 scholarships. Former CEO opens STEM camp in Detroit. Anonymous donation builds library in rural Alabama. Spoiler, it was him. But there was one question he still couldn't shake. Where was she? Margaret Evelyn Astor. She had vanished again. No interviews, no public sightings, not even a mention in the business journals. Until one day Brandon received a letter. A real one. Written in that same elegant cursive. Mr. Keller, if you're not too busy changing the world, I'd like to see you again. Tuesday, 2 p.m., Central Park, Bench 7. No signature, but he didn't need one. He arrived early. It was a sunny spring afternoon in New York. Birds chirped. People jogged by. Ducks glided across the water. And there she was. Same green coat, same warm eyes, sitting on bench 7, as if she'd never left. You came, she said, smiling. Of course. Still swapping seats with strangers? Not lately, he chuckled, but I've given away a lot more since then. They sat side by side, watching the world move around them. He told her everything, the backlash from her board, the victories with the trust, the kids who wrote him letters, the schools they built, the ones still left to build. She listened with quiet joy. And then he asked the question that had been burning in him since the beginning. Why me? She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to him. Because power makes most people louder, but kindness makes the right people heard. And you didn't hesitate. You gave something up when no one asked you to, when no one was watching. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small old-fashioned key, placed it gently in his hand. There's a property in Vermont. It used to be a summer camp for orphaned children. It needs life again. It's yours. Why do you keep giving me these things? He asked. She smiled. Because you keep using them, right? They sat in silence a moment longer. Then she stood up. Thank you for choosing to see people. He rose with her. They hugged once, quietly, and then she was gone, blending into the crowd. A legend, a whisper, a spark. Brandon stood there, holding the key. He didn't feel richer. He felt entrusted, and that was the greatest gift of all. He didn't give to be seen. He didn't sacrifice to gain. He simply gave, and in doing so, discovered a purpose far greater than himself. Thank you for watching. If you want to get more that kind of stories, press like and check out our channel.